Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Joe Reardon, President and CEO of the Greater Kansas City Chamber of Commerce, and we want to welcome you to this incredibly timely and important conversation, cybersecurity. Why haven't we figured this out yet? When we all had to suddenly shift to 100% virtual last March at the Chamber, we did it quickly and as safely as we could. Like so many workplaces, technology allowed us to keep doing our job of supporting Chamber members like you and spreading vital information in the early days of COVID. Through Teams, Zoom, and a load of other platforms, we could all continue to collaborate and stay connected when it was hard to look down the road more than a week at a time, it seemed like. But we all know that better, faster technology means staying vigilant. Businesses were increasing their cybersecurity as fast as they could over the course of this last 15 months. And nationwide, we saw security issues occurring, such as hackers gaining access to personal information from our retail outlets, random strangers somehow getting into virtual classrooms and rooms, and of course, the phishing emails that so many of us see, even on an ongoing matter. And the list really of issues goes on and continues in many ways to grow. So I know on all of our minds is what should we be doing? What do we need to be doing now and going forward? So to dive deep into this topic, we turned to the experts from Accenture Security. Doug LaGore is Managing Director and Midwest Security Market Lead with Accenture. He's focused on leading and driving clients' digital identity and cyber program initiatives to provide enhanced security services that are agile and ready, yet easy to understand and consume. And CJ Sui is Managing Director and Midwest Products and Cloud Security Lead for Accenture. CJ has had over 12 years of experience in IT and enterprise security consulting services, including identity and access management, security assessment, strategic planning, architecture design, and implementation. CJ has served clients in different industries ranging from energy and utilities to healthcare, retail, manufacturing, and public sectors as well. So please join me in welcoming both Doug and CJ today.
Hey all, Doug LaGore here. Thanks for the time today and spending a few minutes with us out of your obviously busy days that you have. We're extremely excited to be here from an Accenture Security perspective and to support the greater Kansas City area as well. So CJ and I just wanted to spend a few minutes kind of going over some of the cybersecurity trends, questions, and answers that we're seeing with our clients. And, we've also kind of taken a view of this kind of space to kind of look at it from, what can a large organization take from cybersecurity and what can they do directionally at this point in time? What can kind of a mid-market organization do? And then as well, what can, a small, 1-2 person kind of company do to kind of increase their security posture and so forth. So we've got a couple of areas that we wanted to dig into today with you all. Really we're talking about what can you do from, we call it cyber defense perspective, which is, how do you defend against ransomware, the threats that are out there? What can you do from an identity and access perspective? Because it honestly all comes back to that first point of log on to your systems, or maybe you're using a cloud provider like a Google or a Microsoft Azure or an AWS. And then, the other part is what can you be looking for internally, and as well, what can you take in from an external kind of threat perspective to form the direction you want to go in terms of, what you're looking to do from a cybersecurity perspective. And we call this like, why haven't we solved this yet? Because the reality is, I think CJ and I have seen that, it gets back to getting to the basics. We'll kind of talk about what that means. And so a lot of our clients are saying, wow, this is really complicated, but what can I do to kind of incrementally layer in cybersecurity and then also kind of progress where I am today, moving that forward. So, just if we think about this really quickly, year over year from 2020 to 21, I mean, we've seen about 160% increase in, external kind of threat coming into organizations and clients across North America, frankly, globally as well, right? And so when we get into like 2021, where we are now, I mean, we're almost at a 200% increase at this point in time in terms of threats that were previously registered publicly, right? Because a lot of these things are kept quiet as well, to that which, we have now. And so what we're also seeing though is the amount of money that's being requested in ransomware scenarios is just getting astronomically larger, right? We're seeing a lot of sophisticated organizations, whether it's nation states, so these are countries, right? These are the North Koreas, the Russias, the various countries in between, banding together in some sense to kind of bring attacks on organizations within the US or globally for that matter, and really industrializing what they're bringing and threatening clients with, our clients with, our businesses here in the US and so forth. So that's kind of a tee up of like where and what we're seeing. And I would think from an enterprise level organization, you're probably is at that level seeing, geez, I can't get my hands on cybersecurity skills fast enough, right? And from a kind of a smaller organization, it's what do I need to do to at least have a defensible position in what do I need to really look at if I have a few dollars to spend on cybersecurity, and what can I expect from the cloud providers I may work with or the application providers I may work with, that I'm effectively running my business on. The other thing I think Joe brought up is a huge thing here is with the advent, we're in the cloud era. I mean, we have a number of clients who are like, hey, we are already in cloud, right? Like there's no longer a journey to cloud. We are there. What we're contending with is faster is great. It's great from a cost reduction perspective. It's great from an operational perspective in terms of, bringing up additional capacity for services and so forth that you may be providing for your business. But fast is good, but I still have to be secure. So what can I do from for instance, Amazon Web Services perspective to go ahead and introduce security, we call them guardrails, that will then allow you as an organization to move quickly, get your services up and running, but then also render them securely, right? And these are things like leveraging authentication, which is, proving who the users are as they come in to access your services. And then as well, stepping up, you've probably all heard of, you have to turn on multi-factor, whether you're banking or, whatever it may be in your personal life and how you're interacting with, the services you use and the companies you work with. But at the enterprise level, what do we need to additionally add to step up? We call these risk factors, right? So do I know about the device that's accessing the service? Can I see if the device was jailbroken, for instance, right? Everybody does those types of things maybe to their iPhones or to their Android devices to get some other functionality. But that opens up avenues on the device, right? Or, has the fingerprint changed because, maybe I lent it to the phone to my wife, right, to go ahead and use it, and we changed the fingerprint ID or the retina scan. Like I need to know that because that could be a phone that was lost or stolen, right? So it's how do we bring these guardrails into kind of our cloud movement? And then the other thing that we're kind of seeing is at an enterprise level, so large organizations and then the mid-market organizations, is security has historically, when we talk about cybersecurity, been viewed as a business, not really an enabler, right? It's been as a security people show up after the product has kind of been developed or an application has been developed. And, the security group says, well, nope, you didn't do this. You didn't, put role-based access control in. You didn't do, appropriate penetration testing and so forth. Go back to go, right? And so what we've realized over the last couple of years is that model doesn't work, right? And so with agile development, which is, iterative, very quick release patterns every 2 weeks, get something out into the wild so you can kind of test it. security has to be part of that development life cycle, right in lockstep with the organization or the department that might be developing the application. And that allows you as an organization to have more secure products, better quality, and then of course, as you release something, you're more insured against threat and attack. And ultimately, across all of this, what are we trying to do? We're trying to maintain trust with our consumers, our customers we're interacting with, because that is the key thing that we cannot have rattled. And that's obviously from a marketing perspective, what the ransomware folks and the threat actors are looking at is, how can I make money? How can I knock a company kind of off its stride, if you will, and impact that trust? So those are the kind of the influencing things that we're seeing occur all at the same time. And it's just getting faster and faster. So what we want to do is kind of drill into that a little bit. And so if we think about, the major things that are occurring right now, from a ransomware perspective, we are really seeing the industrialization of all of the actors and the threat capabilities that are out there. And what I mean by that ultimately is it's almost like the attackers have their own supply chain, right? And so in their supply chain, I guess, Chris, if you just want to move forward one, in their supply chain, we're really talking about attackers getting so smart that they have people who are banding together, certain people writing the ransomware, kind of bots and so forth, the botnets and the various kind of capabilities. Then they have marketers who are part of the team. Then they have people who are running the actual campaign against an organization. Then you have kind of a financial component associated with it. And really what you're starting to see, or we are starting to see from a ransomware perspective, is a whole organized group that is almost functioning like a small company, if you will, the way I kind of look at it, bringing together the best of each skill to then go ahead and attack us as companies and organizations. So when you think about that, it's like, how do we even address that at this point in time, knowing that, the dollars are not endless, right? And the spend that every company has is limited, right? Because security is a huge component of it, obviously, but we can't spend all of our money on security. Obviously, we have to do other things with our business propositions and our product development and everything we're bringing to our clients and our customers, right? So that's an area where we think the back to basics approach in terms of protect, detect, identify, defend, those kinds of statements are significant and really focus a business's spend on various discrete areas to go ahead and actually effectively defend against cyber attacks and so forth. We'll get into that in a second. The other area that we're seeing as a big threat area is if you think about information technology, which is all the systems that are obviously, everybody knows this, running your business, or maybe it's just the services you're interacting with from, maybe you're using Salesforce or you're using another kind of CRM platform where you've got your Workday from an ERP perspective, or maybe it's ADP you're using and so forth. So we've got all of that kind of security wrapped around those areas. But then when we think about, for instance, manufacturing, and to some degree it could be defense industrial base, it could be consumer products and so forth. We're seeing a focus now from the ransomware on operational technology. So that's this OT item underneath 3 that's listed here on the slide. These are the sensors on the lines. For instance, when you think about the pipelines that are out there in a resources client, these are the devices that are hooked up to, a product, a car maybe as it's being manufactured. So a manufacturer can go ahead and understand where it is on the assembly line or something of that nature. Maybe it's a testing kind of harness that gets stuck on an engine or something of that nature. We're seeing those areas or those devices, those things as entry points for attackers. And really what we see larger clients doing at this point in time is trying to retool what was previously an information technology based security program to that which is operational technology based, right? And this goes all the way out to, for instance, large oil platforms sitting out in the Gulf, right? With all of the transient workforce that you have, how do you secure all of the systems in that area and then bring OT and IT together such that you have one common view from a board perspective or from maybe a leadership perspective, depending on the size of your organization and what you're doing, a real understanding of like where the risk is in your organization. And then finally, we're also seeing that kind of industrialized attacker chain, if you will, the supply chain focus, across the IT/OT network space and the sourcing of that, like I had mentioned, through supply chain. So the big thing in all of this is, it's a little bit of fear, uncertainty, and doubt, right? But our attackers are ultimately getting very smart, and they are getting more repetitive and more focused. I think our big thing that we are also seeing is, and the one thing to kind of take away from this as we kind of continue through here in our conversation is, look, have a plan, right? That seems obvious, but it's kind of like the Mike Tyson conversation, right? Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. And the joke here is that practice that plan, really, right? Maybe not a joke, but it's like practice, conduct the tabletop exercises if you're a large organization to make sure that your IT group, your legal group, your marketing group, your C-level all understand their roles in an incident, right? And then if you're kind of a mid-market organization, it's probably the same thing, just a little bit, maybe less players. If you're a 1 or 2 person kind of company that's, a startup or that's the size of your business, it's look to your providers, whether it's your cloud providers that you're working with, or just literally have a list of what you're going to do, right? Meet with your, your legal partners, whomever that may be, to say, do they have a plan for cybersecurity and what would happen in a breach scenario? So, over all of this, it is have a plan. The actors are getting smarter, but what we want to kind of dive into, and CJ will pick up here, is kind of what we see as the major 4 components of how we can kind of get to a defense-based position, and then we'll go into some more specifics around some of the newer concepts that are out there, and then we have some content around what we're seeing from the executive order that got passed out from President Biden here. I think it was signed about May 12th of this year, and how that's progressing and what that means for both commercial clients as well as public sector folks too. So with that, I'll pass it over to CJ.
Okay. Yep. Thanks, Doug. So as Doug just explained, the threat landscape is changing rapidly, and bad guys are getting smarter and smarter, right? So this means we have to change the way how we go about defending ourselves in the cyberspace. In cyber defense, there are 4 things, let's say, they're most important or critical to all companies. So that's the graph you see here. That's a circle of the cyber defense. The first one is prepare, right? Before anything else, you need to know the threat. You need to know what's happening outside the world so you can prepare, right? Understand who is after you, what they're after, what their motivation is, and what is their tactics, techniques, and procedures, or TTP, or that's a term in cyber defense. Tactics, techniques, and procedures. Basically, that means that's the bad guy's playbook, right? So you need to know their playbook, and you need to know what the vulnerabilities that they are trying to exploit in your environment, right? So if you don't know your threat, you cannot understand what's going to happen to you, and then you won't be able to, to be well prepared. That's the first one, prepare and know the threat. And the second one is protect, right? You need to train your people, set up a governance, deploy processes, and implement technologies to really harden your company's environment, and make it as difficult as possible for the attackers to succeed, right? So we're going to explain a few examples of how to protect your organization in the next few slides, but here the one thing I want to highlight. That is, in order to effectively protect your organization from the threats, you need to be the threat yourself, right? So what does that mean, be the threat yourself? It means you need to test your defense, your cyber defense measures against the worst scenarios, you worry about, in the same way a real attacker would do, right? Sort of like what Doug just mentioned. You have a plan, you need to really test out that plan, practice yourself. This is called adversary simulation, or simulate what a real attacker would do in your environment. Right now, as we have seen, almost all companies are still way behind on this one. Right? For example, Doug mentioned ransomware attack. Right? You need to figure out what would happen. Right? What if you get a ransomware attack and someone encrypt your data in your environment, which would take down your business operations, and they deleted or disrupted your data backup operation, so it's not easy for you to quickly roll back and recover. And they also stole your crown jewel data and threatens that they're going to post in the dark web, right? So what would you do? What your plan is in that case? But without this thorough testing, you cannot just feel confident you're well prepared, well protected. Right? You need to know the threat to prepare, and you need to protect yourself and to be the threat yourself to test. And then the third one is to detect. In other words, you need to see the threat, right? Can you guess that what's the average time attacker is inside the victim network before the attack or the compromise is detected, right? So that means basically when you get a compromise or attacker gets into your environment, usually it stays there for a while, right? It makes some moves and before it gets detected. On average, that is over 6 months. In many cases, over 9 months or even longer. So one company we work with or asked our help at one time to do an adversary simulation against their environment. They detected our testing in 2 weeks. Their security team was actually pretty proud of it because it's way below the average, or not a month, only 2 weeks. But however, in reality, within 2 days of that exercise, our testing team was able to obtain access to all of their directory services, all their identities, all their access privileges. We actually got a complete control of one of their critical business applications, that's essential to their business. So, here, what the company needs to do is to enhance your security monitoring and analytics, leverage new tools, capabilities such as automation, artificial intelligence, machine learning, in order to see the threat in real time, right, and detect the threat in minutes, or at most hours, and not weeks or months. So, and then the last one is respond and recover. Right? Once you see the threat, you need to do something. You need to expel the threat. You need to get it out and keep it out. The biggest challenge here is to get a sense of the whole scope, the whole picture of what's going on in your environment, where the attacker is, where they're hiding, what their next move is, etc. Right? In the adversary simulation exercise I just mentioned, it actually took our security team actually went through 4 rounds with the company's security team. When we were first detected, we went to a blind spot in their environment, a place there in their environment that we know that their security team cannot see us. Then after their security team is done with their cleanup exercise, we came back. For that particular company in their environment, their blind spot is their Linux environment. So they have Windows and Linux in their landscape. Their security tools and processes only cover Microsoft Windows environment, not Linux. So then when you have a weak blind spot like that, attackers would find out and then would definitely take advantage of it. So, sophisticated attackers know your environment better than your own security team in many cases, right? They will watch what security team is doing and find your weakest spot, and then use that information to figure out what their next move should be. So in this cyber defense circle, prepare, protect, detect, respond, and recover, right? In other words, know your threat, be the threat, see the threat, expel your threat, or that's the way for us to outsmart the bad guys.
And I would say that, just to kind of add on here, again, just a lens of this for a large organization, obviously a cybersecurity group with a chief information security officer, you're executing on all of these items, right? And there's various tools and processes. And the biggest thing in all of this, I will say, is getting everybody else in the organization to realize this concept, right? Because you have legacy technology, you've got new initiatives, and kind of getting this to be layered in to whatever your agenda may be and how you're building out your capabilities annually. It's hard, right? It's costly, it's a lot of time, it's change management. But then if I look at it from like a mid-market and then kind of a smaller company, a very kind of, like maybe you're got a 2 to 5 people, there's areas here that you can kind of take this model and do the same thing, but at your scale that's required, right? And so I think that's just, the practice aspect of this, right? And then it's also the piece where CJ was talking about, think like the attacker. That seemed like an obvious thing, but we have a lot of clients who, you get to the end of it because the timelines are so tight, and building a product that is, it's like, oh, security, that's right. And then I think the other part of this is, well, where do we start, right? There's so much data, there's so many apps, there's so many things I need to secure. This seems overwhelming. It's focus on the data that your applications are using and look at it from that perspective, because you will very quickly see, maybe it's payment card data, maybe it's, HIPAA or health data, maybe it's a NERC SIP environment from a nuclear utilities perspective, right? Or critical infrastructure. If you start focusing that way, the scale of what, prepare, protect, detect, respond, and recover encompasses starts to get manageable.
Yep, that's good. Yep, thanks for chiming in. Dr. Nell, let's talk a little bit about the protect in the cyber defense cycle, right? Prepare, protect, detect, respond. So in protect, I will use cloud as an example, right? Both Joe and Doug mentioned the cloud first approach. So I think cloud probably is the best example to articulate this point here. So now more than ever, I would say companies need to prioritize the cloud first approach to enable the business to transform with agility at scale to accelerate and grow their business, right? But along the way, like Joe and Doug both commented, security is often seen as the biggest inhibitor or sometimes even blocker to the cloud first journey. Right? I'm sure all of you probably have heard or even experienced some stories about the security breach that involved a public cloud provider. Right? People always worry about a cybersecurity storm, per se, is brewing on their journey to the cloud or in the cloud. Right? So what are the challenges here, right? Why is the cloud security this complex, this difficult? I mean, there are skill gaps, hard to find the people who know it well. There are legacy tools, there are siloed teams. For example, different business units or different lines of business in a large company tend to do their own thing, et cetera, all these challenges. All these are the symptoms of a fundamental problem. Fundamentally, it's because, these days companies are going through digital transformation, cloud adoption, and whether they have realized or not, essentially they are changing the way how their data and application are being accessed. Right? So with the cloud adoption, plus working from home, mobile access, software service or SaaS tools, et cetera, the new enterprise traffic patterns are breaking the legacy or the old network security model. Right? The old way of network security model, the perimeter-based network security, no longer works. That model was from 1990s and was meant to solve a different problem at that time. When the companies have all their resources, applications, et cetera, in a data center, you can carve out your internal network versus external world as external network. But now in the cloud era, that boundary between internal and external is disappearing. So we need a new security model to solve the new problem, or make the cloud-based infrastructure secure, and it needs to be fast, scalable, it needs to be frictionless, and of course, cost-effective. Right? Only then the business can achieve the full value of the cloud investment. In that process, security needs to be accelerator instead of an inhibitor or even roadblock. Right? So how do we do that? Chris, if you move to the next slide, I think Doug has a great model to share with us.
Yeah, so CJ kind of teed up the concept of what's the buzzword right now. I guess I'll say a couple of words, right? And it's zero trust. And so what that really is saying at this point in time is that, we can no longer assume that just because we logged on to an application or just because we used a VPN to get into maybe our company's intranet, and had some degree of maybe an RSA token to type in a code for multi-factor or whatever you may be using at this point in time, that everything is good. Because what we see, for instance, from I think recently we had the SolarWinds breach, which was, a compromise to SolarWinds, the kind of management utility, if you will. And then we had another one recently around Kaseya, which was a managed infrastructure provider utility that threat actors got into. Once they get in, they move laterally and horizontally. And they're looking for ways to get to privileged access, which is the highly, not confidential, but the highly, the risky access. So the keys to the kingdom, if you're in IT speak, this would be your tenant accounts for AWS, or your subscription keys for Azure, or your root accounts for Unix, Linux. Once they get on those, and if there's no challenge while they're in and on those environments or on those boxes or hosts or applications or in those cloud provider management consoles, they can do whatever they want. So historically what's happened is, I log in, maybe I did my VPN and I'm good and I can do whatever I need to do, which means I have kind of unfettered access across everything that I may be granted access to. And oh, by the way, I might not be monitored while I'm executing commands or doing things inside of AWS or in Azure or in an application. What Zero Trust is saying is we really need to be aware at any given state or step while a user is navigating through your systems or interacting with your product, depending on if they're a consumer or a client or a customer, or if they're workforce, meaning employee, contractor, business partner, third party, something of that nature, kind of what they're doing, what data they're accessing, which is ultimately probably through applications and so forth. But I need to be able to see, for instance, Doug, me, as I'm navigating and working with that application or with that service to make sure that, Doug's gone and tried to transfer, the classic example is $10,000 from, AP to AR or whatever it may be, accounts payable to accounts receivable. Or Doug may have gone and tried to look up health records of some patients that I wasn't supposed to. But what that means is that from a large organization perspective, you need to be able to have visibility into, we call it the session, as I'm navigating through, I'm working my workflow and so forth. And that is about access management. And it's also about bringing in risk signals, which is in our environment from a cybersecurity perspective, that's all about what type of data am I accessing? What devices am I using to do so? Do I have appropriate kind of logging on my devices and so forth, such that my activity is captured? And then finally, what kind of user am I, right? Maybe not finally, that's probably up front. Am I a business partner who's trying to access, SOW, statements of works and, rate cards from a competitor, or am I trying to do something from an intellectual property perspective? Maybe I'm, a certain vendor trying to access someone else's schematics for a pump design or something of that nature, and I shouldn't be able to do that. So we're finding that we see in our clients that they have a lot of basic capabilities. They have some risk factors that they capture, but bringing it all together into this zero trust concept where they're actually acting on the usage pattern and making decisions, as I'm clicking through to challenge is the area where, all of our organizations that we're working with are going towards. Now that's the enterprise view, right? That's the large company view. When we look at it from like a mid-market and then kind of the small, 1-2 kind of entrepreneurial, ongoing kind of concerned company, this is where we need to start leveraging the native services that are provided from AWS, from Azure, from Google, that you can, just have as part of subscribing to those services. And those are things like turning on, for instance, in the Azure environment, continuous access. They have a product there. It's using things like Microsoft Sentinel to, have logs come out of various applications, so you can see maybe a little bit after the point of the actual access has occurred, but at least you have services to review that information. So that's kind of the zero trust concept in our view. Granted, it's a very kind of cursory and summary level view, but we really look at it as securing the workforce, which is your internal side of it, right? It's securing the workplace, which is all of your, devices and how the workforce interacts with the device. It's the workload, which is a nice way in kind of cloud provider terms of saying the applications, the databases, the application servers, the web servers, all the things that serve up your applications. And then ultimately it's about securing operations. And that securing operations side of it is to say, great, I can do identity and login for the workplace. I know how my network's configured. I know how my databases are configured and who has read and who has write and, execute at the lowest level on these instances and things that I own. But what am I doing with all that data? And that's where the kind of operations side comes into it. Again, at a large scale organizational perspective, you have an operations capacity, right? These are the level 1, level 2, level 3 kind of analysts who are looking at data flowing through from a security operations center perspective. In that environment, it's really focusing on, you have so much data. What do I really need to pay attention to, and identifying where our false positives are. In kind of a smaller organization, that could be, running reports at the end of the day to identify, where and what the kind of key access patterns were. That could also be things like, just running access reviews for, maybe the employees that you have that are working with you. That goes at different scales as well. At the end of the day, it's no longer you're in and you can just work. It's you're into the application, and then depending on what you're executing at the logon portion of the app, at the transaction or the type of function you're executing, and then also what data is that transaction touching and what is it doing to that data. And that kind of feeds back to this application security view of this, which is, where do I start? It's about the data, right? So if we kind of continue on here, we've got really some things just to kind of think about, what's the right starting point. And for a large organization, we really say you need to be firing across identity and access, cloud and infrastructure security components, data security, and application security. And there are probably 40 different views of this, depending on who you speak with. They all kind of fall into these components. You'll see other frameworks that say there's governance and operational support underneath this, and there's a higher level, and there's all these kind of management views of it. But what we're trying to say here is that depending on the size of the organization that you are, here are some of the main things that you can kind of wire together and think about, right? So if you're on the smaller side, obviously we just want to know, do you have access control? Do you have MFA, multi-factor, in place? Are you changing your passwords? The classic things you hear about, right? If you are a smaller organization and you have workloads or servers or processing that's in the cloud, what are you doing to look at from an audit trail perspective in those cloud providers, right? Are you reviewing those? at least monthly to look for some degree of anomalous activity? Do you have support maybe from an outside provider who's looking in for you that you're paying for? That's when you kind of get into more of the SMB kind of space, because there's costs associated with that. But you really want to be able to have at least eyes every once in a while if you're very small from an organizational perspective, looking at the logs and the trails that are there in terms of who's accessing what. And then the other part is making sure that when you deploy your instances inside of, for instance, AWS, that your buckets, your workloads like EC2s, your all computing instances and so forth, like, enable the default security capabilities associated with those. And there's best practices, leading practices, however you want to say it, per cloud provider. Use them, because they're normally covering a good swath or cut of the security that's required for your organization based on size. When you get to enterprise level, that's when you're talking about more of the risk factors that get injected from an identity and access management perspective. You're really focusing on the privilege side of it. We always say if you have $1 to spend in the enterprise space, spend it on privileged access, because if you do get breached, what's going to happen is people are going to say, well, did they secure root access? Did they secure privileged access? That's a very easy thing to kind of pick on. And it doesn't show very well from a media perspective when the story is, we had, access management turned on, but we didn't bother to secure, our highly privileged access, right? It seems kind of like an obvious thing after the thought. The other thing we're seeing from an enterprise perspective, and this has been around for a while, really since the Sarbanes-Oxley side, is the focus on user certifications. And this is, just if CJ works for me or I work for CJ, does he or I, do we still need the access we have, and reviewing that periodically? Typically it's done quarterly if you think about it from a Sarbanes-Oxley perspective, but, moving back to a smaller organization, you can do it, monthly, annually, however often you need to, based on the amount of work and effort that is that's present there. And that may be setting timeouts on accounts even, right? At a small level, small organization, to say, look, if nobody logs in for 30 days, we're turning the account off, or maybe we're disabling it, right? Instead of deleting it. When we move over to kind of data security and app security, as you can see here, I mean, the key point around data security has always been secure the data at rest, in transit, and in use. When I say that, you can probably hear or feel or sense that there's ties to identity, there's ties to cloud. But our key thing here is that if you're an enterprise level user, this is about tokenization of data, right? And what we mean there is really creating a token or a placeholder for a transaction, such that if an attacker ever got hold of the token, they have no idea or way to get back to the actual payment card information, maybe the health data or whatever it may be. And this is, you've probably seen recently with, for instance, like the Apple Card and Apple Pay, that's really where the kind of payment card industry has gone, such that, when we think about breaches that are in the news related to point of sale systems, those clients in those systems, those companies are really pushing that. Okay, well, we got breached, but the data they got is tokenized, so the attacker can never work that back, because that data, that token, is only a pointer, if you will, to the actual data. And then finally, when we look from an application security perspective, a couple of areas that are key here is, make sure that you're running code scanning at a more kind of enterprise level. When we think about that kind of profile of a client, there's obviously at that level, there's vulnerability management. There's all sorts of development lifecycle security componentry that kind of goes into that. Those create very secure products that get pushed out, very applicable at the enterprise level and at the small SMB kind of side. When we get down to kind of the 1-2 person kind of organization, really what we're trying to do is, use the cloud capabilities that are out there, or use, as a service capabilities, if you were delivering products, to kind of test for, open ports, to test for SQL injections, to test for certain things around that in space and environment. And then the final area really is look, it's not just humans. These are services and applications calling in as well. So this is, application programming interfaces, so API security. And this is about making sure that you treat services calling into your product, the same as you would a user, right? And so those services are going to have credentials, which would be, in essence, service accounts, we call them, or usernames, if you will, service names. They're going to have passwords or secrets. And you need to have an inventory of those at a kind of smaller organizational level. But when you get to the enterprise space, these are things where we're starting to use other protocols, such as, we have OpenID Connect, we have OAuth, we have Security Account Markup Language, which is SAML. These are all protocols that are used to secure, frankly, users and services. But the focus here is treat your services the same way you do your users, because there can be a lot of transactions running through services. And if the services are hacked from an external perspective coming in, it's like you're giving them carte blanche at that point in time. So a lot of areas that you can start in. Again, we're trying to kind of give you an enterprise view, mid-market view, and kind of a small business view. And then what we wanted to talk about next, just really quickly here, was it's interesting, so each president who has come in, we go back to, Obama, we've got some order and direction from Trump, and now with Biden, President Biden's issued a new executive order. One could argue whether it's new, but it's new at this point in time. It was published back in May. And really what this was an answer to, and why we're bringing this up, actually, I'll get to in a second, was, we had the SolarWinds breach, we had Colonial Pipeline, we've had there was the Kaseya breach that it just kind of, or ransomware, not ransomware, but attacker item that was just released. There was a recent Microsoft Hades issue with O365 and so forth. So the deal here was, from a governmental federal perspective, we need to be able to, frankly, act faster and in a more coordinated manner, right? And so in the commercial environment, obviously we're all moving at light speed, and we're trying to bring all these things together like we had talked about. When we think about a federal perspective, it's been a little slower to move, right? Because there are so many different kind of variables that we have to take into account. So this directive really, it doesn't necessarily break ground in the sense that, there are new things around identity, or there are new things around application security or data security or so on. What it's doing is it's saying, look, if you're going to work with the federal government, so if you're a supplier, if you're a software developer, maybe the government's buying services from, maybe you're like a Salesforce or something of that nature, or an Adobe or an Oracle or whatever, they're basically saying that you, as a provider of services, need to be able to showcase that you have a secure development lifecycle, right? These are these things around, have you done scanning? Have you done vulnerability management? Have you patched the systems that the service may be running that you're selling to the government? And you're going to have to be able to prove that. It's also saying that it's like, look, all of the organizations that are involved with a government kind of client, as well as within the government, need to be able to have faster and investigative and then remediation capabilities. And ultimately that comes down to, what are the standard playbooks if you get breached, for what kinds of attacks? What do you do across those columns we're talking about? And then detection of instances, there's statements around what we should be doing there, how proactive you need to be versus reactive. And then the interesting part is that from a National Institutes and Standards perspective, people call this NIST. It's like a NIST 800 is typically the kind of security area from a standards perspective. It's writing in concepts around zero trust that we just talked about. What does continuous access look like? Authentication, what kind of perimeters and boundaries have you set up, and how are you testing those and ensuring that if someone got by, what's the next kind of compensating control that comes up? So it's starting to frame this set of higher level standards than thou shalt be secure, right? It's like, well, this is how we're going to do it. This is why we're going to do it. And then also it's asking for companies that are providing services to be more forthcoming and outright, at least in the commercial sector too, about sharing information of breaches. So for instance, if something happened with SolarWinds or with Microsoft, we should probably get together with, the Oracles of the world, the Workdays of the world, the Salesforces of the world, the other companies that are out there providing software and services to try to make sure that we're covering off and not getting hit by the same thing, just from a different angle, right? So that's all getting organized and pushed out at this point in time from an executive order perspective. There are various working groups, and we can introduce you to them where the government is soliciting feedback from industry. So what do we need to do in retail? What do we need to do in insurance? What do we need to do, like I said, in the defense industrial base, healthcare resources, critical infrastructure, to kind of understand what these high level items mean to me in the industry based on my service. And I think the government's doing a great job in terms of soliciting that feedback and incorporating it into the next iterations of these orders and the impact that actually you will feel based on the type of business you do if you're connected directly with the federal sector, or even if you're in the commercial sector. So that's really the kind of view from the executive order perspective. So if we just kind of wrap up here, really just from our talking part perspective. Look, if you step back from this, I mean, there's been a lot of conversation about what can we do at a very kind of high level? Again, this is the enterprise view. What can we do from a mid-market, and what can we do from just, I have a store or a shop down on the road and, in my local community. Our view, and just really distilling it all the way back so everybody can take something from this, is have a plan, talk with your workforce, right? Which is making sure that they are aware of what security needs to be and what it should be, because typically that's like the hardest part. We can make technology and security do what it needs to do. It's making sure that everybody's aware that it's there to help them out, right? It's the practice aspect of it. This is the, have a plan. It's the stay aware side of this. Be incremental is a big thing in the enterprise space, right? This is the classic, like, let's eat the elephant one bite at a time. And then finally, it's like, let's be actionable about it, right? Because I think what we see from an enterprise and from a small business perspective is, wow, you're coming to ask for X amount of dollars to spend on security. What's it actually going to do? How's it going to be tied back to the value proposition that I'm providing to my clients, right? And that's the trust conversation right there. So that was just kind of a high level run through it. I guess if you have any questions or anything like that, we'd be happy to kind of answer anything.
Hey, Doug, it looks like there is a question in the chat from Robert. The question is, we talked about DLP, data loss protection, PAM, privileged access management, and IAM, identity and access management, years ago. How are each of those still a part of the zero trust architecture that we need to focus on today?
Yeah, so I think the identity piece of it, which is the IAM, for those of you who may not know the acronyms, that's the first line right now, right? So access management, adaptive access, the risk signal conversation, all of that comes together from an identity perspective, right? And then the continuous access piece, which is two words to sum up the what am I doing in the session as I'm navigating through and so forth, and actually stopping me in my tracks, doing something to challenge me. Like, I think that's all the identity piece. And, from a privileged perspective, in my mind, that's, the next layer down. And it's probably more from a workforce side of this, right? So my developer community, if I'm in making application updates, I need to be challenged even more so to get access to the accounts I need to do something on a piece of infrastructure that may be supporting an application that is, running a line of business or critical infrastructure. But in there, not only do I need to vault my passwords, I need to be able to check them out and make the end user go do something to grab them. And then I need to be able to, and it sounds like you're aware from a PAM perspective, obviously there's the session monitoring, the key management, the rotation of the passwords, like all of that is kind of a layer 2 view in my mind of like underneath zero trust, what I need to do as well to get me a second piece of it. The DLP side, I think that part is, again, assuming that someone's going to get in, and this is the zero trust piece. If they get in, even past these other controls that I'm talking about that are layered and successive and aware of sessions, and in theory they shouldn't get there if they get to the data, then it's going to be about the tokenization conversation, the encryption of it. And there is a difference, tokenization, encryption, but making sure that an attacker grabs something, then what they have isn't necessarily of use to them. And then again, when we think about the lateral movement, when they get in, all of a sudden we're back up to the identity side of being challenged again. So if I'm jumping from one app or box to the next, and it's one app to another, then it's like that challenge should be there as well. So I think it all kind of comes together. And I agree, we've been talking about it for a while in components, but zero trust is layering it all over the top.